Kia ora and welcome back to The Detail and our first episode of 2026. And just like last year and the 2 years before that, the talk around the office and around the country is all about the devastation across huge parts of the Motu.
A person's missing after being swept away trying to ford Mahurangi River north of Auckland, with urgent searches underway.
The Emergency Management Minister says a number of people are unaccounted for after major slips in Mount Maunganui and Papamoa this morning.
A precautionary state of emergency has been declared for Whangarei district, with Northlanders being warned to prepare to evacuate as a tropical downpour is forecast to intensify.
You know, there was no real warning.
We pulled all the carpets up, threw everything out.
We've had people evacuated from their homes. They've had homes damaged. We've had a lot of rainfall. We've had a lot of slips and trees down, and we've potentially got more to come.
It has been wet. It has been really sad for a lot of people to see them losing their homes, losing everything.
It could be weeks before a massive slip on the road to Northland coastal settlement of Wakura is cleared. With the road to the north already closed by a washed-out bridge in Sunday's deluge, Wakura is now cut off in both directions.
Thames Coromandel Deputy Mayor John Grant is in Whitianga, which is completely cut off by flooding, and says today's reviving memories of Cyclone Gabrielle.
I'm Sharon Brett Kelly, and today the Detail team looks at what's ahead and what needs to change so that we're not talking about the same thing next year. We've brought in some experts on future-proofing, insurance, and what's being done or not being done to ensure that we cope with these big events better. I'm talking to newsroom political reporter Fox Meyer, and it's pretty interesting what he says. This is how he sums it all up.
I always find that Kiwis in particular are sort of like born without a lot of the fears of other people. I don't know if it's the environment or what, but tend to be a pretty fearless people. And I think that might be reflected in our emergency management planning.
Gwen McClurson with me now. Gwen, we've been talking about this. Now, what's your experience in the US when these big events happen?
Well, it's funny. I come from a place where it rains really hard about 10 months out of the year, but our infrastructure can handle it. We don't really get floods. But I think more than that, what stands out to me is if you look at a place like the American South, every year they get slammed with hurricanes, but people know how to prepare for that. It doesn't mean that houses aren't washed away and lives aren't lost, but people are taping up their windows, filling their bathtubs, stocking up on food and water. In the Midwest, where there are tornadoes, houses all have cellars and people get their kids and their pets down there when a tornado's coming. In California, the wildfires are bad, but people get go bags and they know evacuation routes. And I just don't think we're there yet. I think that we've got earthquakes sort of in our collective consciousness, but we don't really have the idea that flooding is something that happens every year in New Zealand. You know, it's not part of our national psyche in the same way that earthquakes are, despite the fact that it's our most common natural disaster and the fact that 2/3 of us live within 5K of the coast.
Well, you know, that's interesting that you should say that because that's pretty much what Fox has been telling me. Let's listen to what he has to say.
I think when New Zealanders think of a disaster, they think of a volcano or of an earthquake. And I think storms are going to take up more and more of that mental landscape the longer this goes on. You know, so I think that we are adjusting to this new normal of having these storms come through more frequently. And, you know, we might notice that right away, but it will take longer for the gears of society and of insurance companies and of government to adjust to that new normal. That's just how politics works, unfortunately.
Well, once again, one of the worst hit areas is Tairāwhiti. We know the Waiaweka Gorge, the main route north of Gisborne, will be closed for about a month. That's Amanda Gillies' old stomping ground, and she spoke to the Mayor, Rehet Stoltz, about this.
We've got police, ambulance, hospital, supermarkets, everyone around the table because already we have State Highway to the Gorge. The Waiaweka Gorge is closed, so we have limited access there. There was an accident in Wairua yesterday, so we were totally cut off for a while because people couldn't go on State Highway 2 South either. We know State Highway 35 is absolutely in the eye of the storm because the worst weather is coming our way for our northern areas. People are very, very responsive now. I'm so proud of our region. If we put out a pānui and say, hey guys, look what's coming our way, please make sure you clean your drains, you make sure your devices are charged, you reach out to your neighbour, and then you don't travel if you don't have to. Our community knows what to do, and I'm so incredibly proud of how we come together every time when something like this happens to us.
I want to talk, though, about the Waiaweka Gorge. What is the latest there? I mean, I'm reading there was something up to 40 slips or something, and sort of how long will that mean the gorge is going to be closed before they're cleared?
They are saying weeks, Amanda, so we are keeping our fingers crossed because it is massive for us in Gisborne. This year, one of my main aims is to take this issue to the government and say, we need route security. We cannot carry on like this. I cannot shut down this region every time we have an extreme weather event.
So what needs to happen? How do you get route security?
The big issue is we are not even, because the Waiaweka Gorge is not in our region. It's in the Opotiki region. So it's not like we are actively involved in it. Our neighbours, we do work with them and they would love our input. But at the end of the day, the funding and the work, the NZTA planning around that sits with the Opotiki and the Bay of Plenty District Council. This year, we want to actively get involved. And I know Trust Rāwhiti has already reached out to ministers and showed them the economic impact that this have had. They've touched base with 50 businesses, just talking about what it would mean for them to cart, and I'm talking about the leader brands and main freight, what it means for them to have to cart their daily trucks down to Hawke's Bay and then up State Highway 5. It adds so much cost. And then think of patients that need to go to Waikato Hospital. You will now need to fly. And what of all our students going back to Auckland and just people wanting to visit? We want to know if you get in your car, you do not even have to check the NZTA website to see if a route is open. We know it is open. And I think our region deserves it.
I'm a bit scared to mention this word, but slash, any sign of that this time round?
So, Amanda, we're still cleaning up the beaches from the last event, and I know that we will see a lot of slash because there will be a lot of water coming down in the next while. We do need to be mindful. Forestry has really been trying to have better practices, and there are a lot of operators that do it well. But we will still see slash coming down, and then we will be tidying up our beaches again.
And Amanda will have an episode on forestry slash out tomorrow. Gwen, you've been talking to RNZ's Kate Newton about insurance. Now, what does she have to say? Because obviously that is a big part of this whole situation that we're in.
Yeah, she tells me that over the last few years, insurance has increased at a far more rapid pace than other living costs. Premiums are going up at a rate of about 30 to 40% a year in some regions. Yeah, it's huge.
But generally, it seems to be pockets. All of the regions that we hear about all the time, places like Hawke's Bay, Nelson, Northland, those types of areas seem to be experiencing the largest increases in premiums as insurers are looking to, rather than what they did in the past, which was to spread the cost across a whole region, actually look at smaller areas, even down to property level.
And are we at a point yet where individual properties cannot get insured at all, or are we moving toward that, do you think, or is that not even on the table?
That is a little bit of a mystery. We find out about individual property owners who are struggling to get insurance normally when they come forward and tell us because they're desperate. Insurance companies are not openly saying, yes, we are no longer insuring in these places. The reporting that Finity did for Treasury did show that in some regions, I think Wellington was one in particular, Nelson, Tasman was another area, they were showing that it was very difficult for a significant proportion of properties in those areas to be able to get an online quote for insurance, which isn't to say that those houses couldn't be insured, but it would require a phone call to the insurance company, talking through the particular circumstances. In some cases, the insurer might at that point choose to insure, or it might choose to decline to insure. If you already have an insurance policy in place, it's probably much more likely that that is going to roll over. You might experience higher premiums. But in terms of an insurance company actually shedding customers, I'm not really hearing anything like that. There are anecdotal reports, but there isn't a wholesale withdrawal by any means.
So what do you do? I suppose, what do you do if you're looking to buy a home?
I would say the first thing that people should be doing is looking at the hazard overlays, the hazard information that is available for a property that you're interested in, and really taking that seriously. If your house is in a flood zone, and this information is available through a lot of councils now. Auckland Council has particularly detailed flood hazard mapping. Other councils do the same. It's also available through the National Hazards Portal, I think it's called. I would look at that. I would take that seriously. You can call up insurance companies and ask if they've had a claim on the property. The National Hazards Portal actually shows if there have been recent insurance claims for a particular property when you look at it. The problem that arises is that not everybody has the choice to pick and choose where they want to live, the kind of property that they can afford. We're talking about renters as well, who typically have less access to some of this information. I haven't heard in my long history as a renter myself of any renter looking at a limb for a property and understanding the hazards. A lot of renters as well don't necessarily have contents insurance. So even if you're not bearing the burden and responsibility of damage to a property, you are, at risk of losing your stuff if your house gets flooded.
I want to ask about the government payouts through the NHC, the Natural Hazards Cover. So how does that work, and is that set to change?
So there's been rumblings around whether that should change, what we should do about that. One of the hazards that it does cover is damage to land from flooding, but specifically not damage to the house itself. So if the underlying land that your house is built on gets damaged by flooding, then there is some compensation that you're entitled to, but not for your house. If your house floods, if your house is just in a flood zone and keeps flooding, there's no expectation from the government that it will, via NHC or any other mechanism, continue to pay out on that property. I do believe that insurance companies are open to conversations with homeowners about what they're doing, in terms of remedial works, whether that's putting in better drainage on a property, whether if it's possible to shift the footprint of a dwelling, things like that. But all of those things cost money.
Yeah, they sure do cost a lot of money. But I want to know if councils and the government are really facing up to the issue. So let's get back to Fox Maya.
Yeah, I think with the inquiry into the weather events and then the changing legislation here, it's clear that this is being taken seriously, but these are not new concerns, right? A lot of the feedback on reforms in this sector are people saying that we've been saying this, we've said this before. We knew these vulnerabilities were here, and this event exposed to them, but that's not a shock to the people who were aware of it. I think the danger that it prescribes is enough that there's enough of an impetus here to really make some change. Even if you're not in Auckland or you weren't in Auckland for that weekend, it was hard to avoid the understanding of how serious that was.
It's the new Emergency Management Bill, which is designed to address any failings. But is that actually in place?
No, so it is currently before Select Committee. They're taking submissions now. You have until, I think, February 3rd to get those in, and then we'll read them out. And I think this is where it's going to get really interesting, because we're going to get to see the feedback from all of these groups on how to improve this system. And unlike some other bits of policy, this is not particularly contentious or one side versus the other. Everyone here wants the same outcome from this bill, and the feedback that has gone into it, the reports before it, the calls from experts have been pretty consistent for a long time. So the question marks linger, especially over insurance and private entities, but broadly speaking, I think this will be a good opportunity or a fun thing to watch to see if there is already consensus and if we know what we're doing.
The money side of things. Is more money going to go into emergency management?
I know that some of the calls here from the review were to increase both training and operational capability and personnel. So I imagine that comes with a price tag. And I think of all the things you could ask for funding for, resilience and disaster prep is probably the most easy to communicate why investment is good there. But on investment, I think one of the things that's really important and one of the costs here that probably won't be calculated outright, but is still important to think about, is that if we have a situation, where, say, there's a bridge in the South Island that keeps getting washed out every time there's a big storm or whatever else is coming along, and then our response to that is to rebuild the bridge just in time for another storm to come wash it back out again, we cannot afford practically or economically to be just keeping our heads above water with disaster response. There needs to be an emphasis on not just building back, but building back better and moving that bridge or redesigning it if we need to, so that we don't just keep replacing things that break. And that's a concept that can scale up, right? Because it might not just be a bridge. It might be, every time there's a storm that hits Auckland, the same things are breaking and we're repairing them at the same rate the storms are coming. So it's just like this constant merry-go-round of restoration. That doesn't make sense.
No.
And I think that logic is reflected in these reviews, and I think everybody around the table is very aware of the need to make those changes.
Okay, that's interesting, because we've been talking a bit about the Waiaweka Gorge in the Eastern Bay of Plenty. I mean, that is a case of something that road is probably going to be closed now for several weeks, plus State Highway 35 around the East Cape. That happens time and time and time again. But finding an alternative solution to something like that's not easy, and a huge amount of money.
A huge amount of money. And, I mean, it's just one of those questions of what are you willing to spend money on and what are you not? Because I think the fallacy that I have a lot of trouble with when it comes to planning and resilience, and whether this is for large scale or local scale disasters, doesn't matter. It's the thought that keeping things the way they are now is something that we choose to do because it's cheaper, but you will pay that cost eventually.
Alexia Russell's in the studio now. And Alexia, you spoke to Nick Leggett, the Chief Executive of Infrastructure New Zealand. What did he have to say about this?
Yeah, well, we talked about funding priorities, using new technology to get ahead of problems before they arrive, and changing the way Kiwis think about infrastructure so we're not repairing the same roads over and over again.
There is broadly over time an affordability challenge for everything in New Zealand. I mean, we're up against it economically, and it's about multiple ways of fixing or improving this problem. And the first one is having conversations about the infrastructure we choose to keep and the stuff we want to protect and adapt to the climate conditions that are changing. And for me, we want to be armed with information about where risk is, what risk looks like, so we can prioritise where we invest. At the moment, we don't have enough what you would call mitigation funds or adaptation funds. So when a road gets knocked out, we're often building and hopefully improving a little bit from that happening again. But simply reinstating is not going to be the long-term answer.
So it's road crashes, road rebuilds, road crashes again the next time the floods come. Yeah. Have we got to a stage where some communities need to leave?
I don't think we've got there yet. I think when you look at overseas countries, and as Infrastructure New Zealand does, we look at their approach to making investment choices and to building infrastructure. And it won't surprise people to know that culture and societal ways of doing things influence those heavily.
How do you mean? Like we're resistant to spending money on things like
this? Well, I think that's part of our culture, is we think best value is lowest cost. This is going to cost us more. We need to be armed with the evidence around, if we spend money, that it's going to reduce the risk of things failing in the future. And that investment also has to be about protecting lives and livelihoods. There are lots of countries around the world that build better than we do and get better value from what they build. because they've got a more cooperative way of doing things, but they're better at having confronting and conversations that prioritise where they invest. Now it's almost a sort of a cliche now when someone like me says we're a long, thin country and we're geographically and geologically challenged. That's true. So we do have dispersed populations, and the roading networks and other bits of infrastructure that are required to service our population, they do cost more, and we have a smaller group of people to fund that. So in the medium to long term, I think there might have to be choices around where people live, but humans have always had to shift throughout the millennia to deal with changing, might be geography or climate. So I think we do need to confront that. But
that's massive, though, isn't it, in New Zealand? You've got families that have embedded in coasted land for generations. You've got whānau iwi,
massive
tribal land. You're not going to move people off their beachfront properties, even if that beach is disappearing.
That's right, and that's so how we have confronting discussions as a country is going to be key. How we discuss with people who live in exposed places, and it's not just people in provincial or rural areas. Cities now are continually being flooded in places. There are pockets where people's homes are flooding. This is a national problem, and it is going to be hard, but we've got increasingly tools with technology and digital tools that are going to point us in the direction of where risk is going to be greater, and model what might happen if we do A, or if we do B, or if we do C. There might have to be, I think, the most immediate challenge will be, it's what we call, levels of service. But, there might be parts of the country that they don't get the full Monty highway or, sealed road in when it's knocked out. It might just stay as metal, as a dirt road. Those, I think, will be the most immediate challenges and changes that we might have to take. And is
that like a give up thing, though? Is it like, okay, Waiweka, we know that your community is going to be isolated in the next big flood. You're just getting the metal, make do, because it's going to go again.
Well, this is what I mean about it shouldn't be deal with this and take what you get. This is why it has to be a conversation, because these are trade-offs. We can't afford to keep fixing in the way that we have. I think New Zealand does the reacting to crisis quite well.
Get in the army.
That's right, and we all feel good, and we
supplies in. Yeah,
we do that stuff quite well. We react well to a crisis, but how we get in front of the next crisis and change our practice and our choices to lessen the burden of the next heavy rainfall or storm, that is our challenge.
And Nick Leggett says the ideal time to tell politicians what our priorities should be is election year. That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. Our thanks to Kate Newton, Fox Meyer, Rehet Stoltz and Nick Leggett. Ka kite.